Away we go. Welcome. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. This is the show where we discuss sports topics from a business perspective. I'm your host, Edward Brown, along with my co-host, Bruce McGowan, longtime sports radio personality. Today's show is going to be very special because we're going to have on the air Glenn Dickey, who is now with the SF Examiner, and his website, you want to check him out, Glenn with two N's, Dickey.com. And Glenn was with the San Francisco Chronicle for 42 years.
That's right. Glenn was really one of the first of the columnists who wrote columns that kind of got people talking and thinking and reacting. And that's one thing I think we'll talk to Glenn about. It's interesting. He was kind of at the cutting edge of a new wave of sports journalism that really came along in the 70s.
Do you think in a 1 hour show he'll be able to cover all 42 years worth?
No question.
No question at all. Okay. And at every commercial break, we're going to ask a sports trivia question where the theme today is baseball in the desert, Arizona.
Oh, there you go. Spring training.
Little spring training stuff,
Yeah.
sure. We're right in spring training.
Sure.
And at each commercial break, when we ask that question, the first 3 emails with the correct answer are going to win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Lighthouse Resort and Marina, located about an hour north of San Francisco. Vacations are free. Their only request, a $75 cleaning fee to cover those housekeeping expenses. Check them out at lighthouseresortandmarina.com. You can listen to us live on iHeartRadio, as well as many other terrestrial stations. And one of the main things we're going to talk to Glenn about is all of the fantastic trades in football that have been announced.
Free agent signings and retirements and some interesting things and developments that are happening.
Absolutely. And let's see, if we have more time, talk a little bit about the NHL article on concussions, alleged cheating in the Little League World Series with the expanded geographic regions. Remember the old Danny Almonte situation?
Yes, oh yeah.
Still got that name in the top of my tongue here.
Yeah.
All right, so stay with us because you're listening to Sports Econ 101. We are sponsored by Pacific Private Money, providing mortgages that are currently yielding 8%. Check them out at pacificprivatemoney.com. Stay with us. We'll be back with Glenn Dickey, listening to Sports Econ 101.
Okay.
All right, so that's our little teaser. And let me save the file here, and then we'll get right into it. Save as. This will be for March 7th show. So this will air this Saturday.
Oh, okay.
Oh, not 7th, the 14th, right?
14.
Yeah, 14th. Okay.
I believe Saturday's middle of the month already. Jeez.
I know, it's 2.5 months gone.
Crazy.
It really is. I know, my son just turned 23.
My daughter's about to turn 10. That's scary.
Oh, yeah. Now she's in the double digits.
By the time she's out of college, I'll be in my 70s.
That's okay. Yeah, you're a young 7.
Oh, yeah.
Take her surfing and everything. Okay. All right, ready? Here we go. I'll let you.
Oh, sure.
Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Again, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Bruce McGowan. And Bruce, why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah, Glenn Dickey is a longtime Bay Area sports writer who wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the largest paper in Northern California for many, many years. And Glenn was, as I mentioned earlier, really kind of at the cutting edge of sports journalism. And he would write sometimes very hypercritical, but very detailed and provocative columns, and now you can read him online, glenndickey.com. He also writes for the San Francisco Examiner. He's covered the Bay Area sports scene for many, many years, a lot of the national and important big name sporting events he's been to as well. And Glenn, I think we should start off by talking about the NFL because as we speak, they just have had a bunch of players changing teams. And, you know, in our area here in Northern California, we've seen the San Francisco 49ers just really implode in the last couple of weeks, maybe in one day, actually. It was like a Black Monday. I mean, they lost Frank Gore. He hadn't signed as we had aired this program, but was about to sign. Micah Iupati, all-pro linebacker. Justin Smith was supposed to retire. And then the biggest shock of all, Patrick Willis hanging it up.
And don't forget Jim Harbaugh
leaving. Jim Harbaugh leaving, yeah. I mean, what is going on with the San Francisco 49ers? What's your feeling about this whole situation?
Well, I think it's very bad. I think that Trent Baalke poisoned Jed York's mind against Harbaugh. Harbaugh was the best coach the 49ers had had since Bill Walsh.
Yeah.
Without doubt. He got him to the Super Bowl. He he was very. Remember, he took over a team that had not won anything several years. Turned them into winners immediately. You know, the kind of coach you just don't let him go. But Balky didn't like him. You know, Harbaugh is not an easy man to like. Anybody in the media can tell you that.
Yeah, I dealt with Jim Harbaugh on a regular basis, and he's kind of a strange bird.
But you know, he doesn't worry. You know, he just does what he thinks, and he doesn't care whether you like it or not. You know, he's just very straightforward. But he and Balky obviously didn't get along that well, and Balky wanted to get rid of him, and so he convinced York. Harbaugh was not talking to York. Harbaugh was, you know, he was concentrating on the football games, and that was it. So, you know, it's easy to undermine a guy who is so single-minded like that, but it also is very detrimental to the future of the franchise.
It's very sad too when you see how quickly this team regressed. Well, they were just on the cusp of being a Super Bowl champion a few years ago. Last year they fell to 8-8. Certainly injuries didn't help them at all there. But when Patrick Willis decided to hang him up, that kind of shocked everybody. I guess though the problem, Glenn, was that he had some foot injuries, and that guy required such quickness with his feet. He said he just couldn't play at the same level.
Well, and toe, you know, he also felt it was gonna, you know, if he kept playing, the toe was not healed.
Yeah.
He kept playing on it, then he could cause himself injury. He might have trouble just walking when he retired. He didn't want that, you know. And he's made enough money, you know, that he can retire. He's not from everything I know about him, he's not a guy who's just going to go out and spend it in Vegas or something like that, you know, or on a lot of fancy jewelry. He's a very solid individual. So
what was it? Turf toe?
He'll be fine.
Was that what it was? It was turf. Was it turf toe basically? It just kept recovering.
Well, it's something like that. It was an injury to his toe. I'm not sure exactly what it was, and he had an operation on it, but it wasn't healed.
Mm.
It was still bothering him, and he couldn't play on it. That's why he didn't come back, you know, last year. So, you know, but you can see the pattern here that everybody who has a chance to get out now is getting out. Vernon Davis has a year left on his contract, but he's put his house on the market in San Jose. What does that tell you? You know, I mean, as soon as that contract expires next year, boom, he's out of here. Everybody who can get out is getting out. And they're not, you know, I don't think they're going to be able to attract a lot of guys in free agency unless they just overpay tremendously.
What do you think is the main reason why these guys are getting out?
Because of Balky. He's poisoned the whole atmosphere. You know, they liked Harbaugh. They were very fond of him. You know, you saw how they celebrated with him after the last game when they won it, you know, and they were, you know, you have to know athletes the way they are, but their affection is sometimes kind of rough. But, you know, they dumped that big can of Gatorade on them and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's athlete love.
Yeah. I guess
you don't go
Vernon too
big
old?
Hug, you know.
Yeah. Glenn, is Vernon, is he too old to trade? Is that the idea then? You just decide to hang it up if you don't think he can be traded?
What's that again?
Do you think that maybe he's too old to get traded?
You're talking about Vernon Davis.
Vernon Davis, yeah.
The tight end, yeah.
Why just give it up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you ask
No, he won't give it up.
Yeah.
As a free agent, if they don't trade him. I mean, they could trade him now, you know, while he's got a year left on his contract, and he would be delighted with that, you know. But if he plays out his contract, he'll just go out as a free agent next year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they can't follow Jim Harbaugh because they go back to college. But
no, it's not that. It's not that they, you know, obviously they can't follow Harbaugh, but they just want to get out from the atmosphere is toxic right now.
Yeah,
you want to get out of there.
Glenn, of course, covered the Raiders back in the '70s during the glory era of John Madden and Ken Stabler, and then the Raiders went to L.A. and the 49ers came along and won 5 Super Bowls in the '80s and early '90s with Walsh and Seifert and Montana and Young. And I got to ask you, you know, Eddie DeBartolo Jr. when he took over the team in the late '70s, I remember he really shook things up and upset a lot of people. And what Jed York is doing kind of reminds me a little bit of what his uncle did.
Well, in a way, because Eddie was bad news when he came into the first thing he did was hire Joe Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
He just ruined the team. He'd taken the team almost made the playoffs the year before. If you remember, they had a couple of missed field goals that should have been made by Steve Missemile, as they call him.
Steve Missemile. I forgot about that. Anyway, Steve Mickemeyer, I think his name was actually, and he had a brother, didn't he? Nick Mickemeyer?
Anyway, it was a playoff, really a playoff team. He just gutted it, and turned it into a terrible roster. I mean, what Walsh inherited, he was the first couple of years that Walsh had that team, he was holding tryouts at lunchtime.
Wow.
Just bringing in guys every day. And he was doing it at lunchtime because he didn't want the players on the team knowing that he was trying these other guys out. But Dwight Hicks came in that way.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And but I don't know that he got any other players, but he was just so desperate to turn over that roster, and then he had a great draft his third year, and that was Ronnie Lott, Eric. They were drafted 3/4 of the defensive backfield.
Yeah.
And, so that that turned it around. But that was what Eddie was doing at that time, and then he hired Walsh. I was pushing very hard for him, of course, and he hired Walsh, and that turned things around. But he still was made Walsh's life miserable because he expected him to win every game.
Yeah, but Walsh said he was going to hang on probably for a few more years. Years later, he mentioned that he probably quit a year or two earlier than he would have liked to, but Eddie was just impossible to work for sometimes.
Oh, yeah, he was really hard because, every time the team lost, Eddie, of course, would be drinking. He'd be drinking all day and night, and he'd be drunk. He'd get so mad, he'd come down to the dressing room and fire Walsh.
Hey, Glenn, stay with us.
Then the next day, he'd rehire him.
Glenn, stay with us, Glenn.
History of like Larry McPhail and Leo DeRocher with the Brooklyn.
Oh yeah, and Billy Martin. Okay, so we're going to cut to our first commercial break here. The trivia theme is baseball in the desert. Okay, what future major leaguer hit 4 home runs in consecutive at bats while playing for an Arizona AAA team? It's going back. Yeah, you got to go back at least 20 years, more than 20 years for this.
Oh, you got me on this one.
Yeah, this is a tough one. The first 3, you've definitely heard of this guy. He was a good player, and he.
Now this is in spring training.
This is spring training.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, AAA team. Okay,
Yeah,
first
AAA,
3 emails with the correct answer win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Email Edward at sportsecon101.com. The answer to this question: what future major leaguer hit 4 home runs in consecutive at bats while playing for an Arizona AAA team? Stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101.
All right. We'll probably let the.
Yeah, just the mic.
I got it. Okay.
But I got now. I switched and I got this, so we're okay.
Okay.
I want to save this here.
Thanks for hanging in there, Glenn. Should be right back here. Matter of minutes, seconds.
Seconds, actually.
Seconds.
Yes. March 14th, segment 2. Do you want to continue on with some of the trades?
Yeah. I'd like to. I'm sure Glenn has some thoughts on that too.
Yeah. Ready to go. Okay.
All right.
Ready. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Again, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Bruce McGowan. When we cut to the first commercial break, we asked this trivia question: what future major leaguer hit 4 home runs in consecutive at bats while playing for an Arizona AAA team?
I have no clue. Maybe Glenn Dickey, our guest, longtime Bay Area columnist, sports columnist, has an idea. Glenn, you want to venture a guess on that one? I'm just stumped.
That was the question?
That
I
was
have
a
no
tough.
idea.
Yeah.
Matt Williams.
Oh, that's right.
Matt Williams is that.
I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, that's why I said you got to go back over 20 years.
That's a good one though. That's a tough one. Yeah.
Okay, so we have on the phone Glenn Dickey, who's a longtime sports journalist, now with the San Francisco Examiner, and was with the San Francisco Chronicle for 42 years. Leah, what was the most exciting? I know we're going to talk a little bit more about football and all the trades that went on, but Glenn, I want to ask you, what's the most exciting sports journalistic, situation you were in, or that you wrote about?
Well, of course, there were two games that really stood out for me in both football. The catch, that game, obviously. But the Raiders had a win over Miami in the Sea of Hands game.
Oh, yeah.
1974 playoffs, yeah.
And both of them were games, everybody remembers the winning touchdowns in those games. But they were games where they were exciting throughout the game. There are some games, you have an exciting finish, but what was leading up to it wasn't that exciting. These games were, breathless excitement, and they were very, very important, So those were two games that really stood out for me. There was in other sports, I covered the Warriors when they won their one NBA championship, and that was a very dramatic thing, but the finals, they won 4 straight over it.
Yeah, Washington.
And the games weren't very close. Very lopsided series. And the Giants, of course, covered the first World Series. I wasn't even in San Francisco at the time. I was in Watsonville, but they sent me up to cover the games that were in San Francisco. And so I saw the first time the Giants were in the series. And that's kind of an interesting finish, too, with the 1-0 game. And McCovey lines out for the last game.
Yeah.
As the story, these things get expanded over the years. And people had Bobby Richardson leaping up to make the kick. Well, it wasn't at all. It was a very routine play for him. He just reached up, And McCovey hit it. He always hit the ball very hard. It was very hard to line drive, but it was not a hard one to catch.
Got to ask you about those games, though. I was lucky enough as a fan to go to the Sea of Hands with my dad and covered the catch game, the NFC title game, when the Niners beat the Cowboys and went to their first Super Bowl. Interesting story about that game. I think there were 9 turnovers in the game. The Raider game with Miami, where the Dolphins were dethroned, they were the 2-time champions. I think there might have been 1 or 2. That was such a well-played game, and the characters, Glenn, on the Raiders.
Yeah, that was. I didn't actually write on that game because it was a Saturday game, and at that time the Chronicle did not have control of the sports section on Sunday. So I was sitting in the stands, and my wife was with me, and we were just walking up to our seats, just as the game started, and I'm kind of watching, and the kickoff, and Miami returns the kickoff for a touchdown.
The opening kickoff, that's right. Yeah.
It was like that for the whole game, but it was just, that was just an incredible game. So, and it was the same thing, the turnovers in the 49ers, because Montana threw,
I think he threw 5 interceptions in that game, didn't he? Yeah. Something like that.
Let's go back to
threw the winning touchdown, so everybody forgot about it.
Of course they did.
Glenn, let's go back to some of these trades that have been going on recently. The Rams are set to deal Bradford for Foles. Was it just an even trade?
Well, Foles he surprised me. I saw him in college, and I didn't think he was that good, frankly. But he's played very well. Bradford he's been injured so much. It's hard to judge him. I think he's played well when he's been healthy, but I wouldn't have traded Foles for him. But who knows?
That's kind of an interesting deal. How about the Jimmy Graham deal from the Saints to the Seahawks? Now, I don't know what his contract situation is. The Seahawks give up, or I should say the Saints give up or get multiple draft picks plus center Max Unger, who's a pretty good pretty good lineman, but man, Jimmy Graham is a force out there. I guess there must have been some kind of contract problem or something, but that's a huge pickup for the Seahawks.
Well, that's the thing, with the salary cap, and I campaigned for years for the salary cap because I thought it was the way to go, and of course, the 49ers were a big factor in that because Eddie was spending so wildly there for a while in the late 80s that, they had, at one time they had Montana, Steve Young, and Steve Bolo as their quarterbacks. Well, three of them were NFL starting quarterbacks, so they were that deep. I thought they needed a salary cap, but it does force teams often to get rid of players just because they're going to be over the cap and, they're spending too much, they're just costing too much, so they have to get rid of them, and that's probably what's happening there.
Now, you must have had a fun time, though, covering those Raider teams. I remember I was just a cub reporter for a little TV station out in the boonies, and going into that Raider locker room with people like Ken Stabler and John Matuzak. I remember John Matuzak came up to me once, and I did this interview with him, and his eyes were going back and forth, and he was saying things like, he said something like, when you come onto the field and you play us, you don't belong on the same field, and we have to impose our will, and we will. And I was thinking, this guy is nuts. And this was after a game. I mean, were the Raider players really that crazy, or was it more of a?
No, most of them were not. They did have a few of them. He was certainly one. But they were just. It was a great time for me because it was the first time I'd really covered anything that big. I'd been covering drag races, for God's sake. I'm not kidding you. They
really?
had, the editor of the Chronicles at that time, Scott Newell, was a huge racing fan.
Oh, boy.
So Rosenbaum Sports Center assigned me to cover a lot of these things and very drag racing. And, oh, my God.
Yeah.
I don't even want to think about it. At any rate, so covering the Raiders was really exciting for me, and I was still pretty young at that time, and so I wasn't. They had one player, George Blanda, who was older than me, but
he was kind of a crotchety old guy, wasn't he, George Blanda?
He could be.
Yeah. Did you get along with him pretty well?
Well, yes and no. We had our moments. There was one time he was mad at me. He said I should kick you over the goalpost, and I told him, well, you're cooking at me wide to the right.
How about John Madden? John Madden,
Madden was always good.
Yeah, I mean, you could just sit down with him and have a conversation about anything, anytime, it seemed like.
Yeah, he was, of course, we didn't have long conversations at that time, but he was good. But they were all, we traveled with the players. At that time, the teams had to pay the way the writers, so we traveled with them and we'd be sitting with them and talking to them. So I was very close to the players, and they would open up, in training camp, in between lunch and the afternoon practices. You'd stop by the players' rooms. Tom Keating used to have a big room up in the top of one wing, and he'd have a bunch of guys up there. They'd just be talking, and I'd go up there, and the understanding was I would not write anything off of what I heard in the room, quoting him. If there was something I wanted to know, follow up on, I would interview him separately. And this is on the record, but I just listened and learned a lot about football, so it was really very interesting time.
Must have been a lot of fun. And I got to ask you today, it just seems like the immediacy of the internet and the digital world has changed journalism to the point where the athletes really don't need the media as much anymore. They can control the message. And I think that's created a certain schism. Of course, the athletes are making ridiculous amounts of money now. They always made a fair amount, but now it's just astronomical. It just seems like I go to the games and I still go into the clubhouses and locker rooms, and maybe it's because the players are a lot younger, but it just seems like there's more of a division, a distance. Do you notice that yourself, Glenn? Because you were talking about the informality of covering the Raiders in the settings.
Of course, nobody ever had it good as I had it at that time. Again, I mean, that was the last of the era where you could be traveling with the players, be around them, and be so close to them. But it was totally different. I mean, because I could talk to any of them and ask them anything, and usually respond. And once in a while there'd be something they didn't want to talk about. That was too not personal, but too much involved with strategy and that type of thing. Or they'd tell me they could tell me something, but they didn't want to be quoted on it.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Sure.
Hey, Glenn, stay with us. We're going to cut to our second commercial break here. Here's our second trivia question. Again, the theme is playing in the desert, Arizona. What was the first major league team to play in Arizona, and what was the year?
Wow.
Okay. First three emails, going to receive that stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Email Edward at sportsecon101.com the answer to this question. What was the first major league team to play in Arizona, and in what year? All right, stay tuned. You're listening to Sports Econ 101.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, Glenn, I'm not sure. I'm thinking maybe the Cleveland Indians because they've been there forever, but I don't know.
The New York Giants.
Was it the New York Giants? Okay, I'll let you answer that one.
The Cleveland Indians played, I think, in Tucson.
Okay, but I remember they and the Giants were two of the first that were. I remember there were.
They came at the same time.
Oh, they did. Okay, so,
right.
But the Giants were the ones that sort of made the first.
And they played each other.
Yeah.
Because they played each other going north.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. I've been going out to a fair number of Warrior games. That's been a lot of fun this year. The atmosphere at the NBA, though, I just don't. To me, it's kind of phony. It just seems too contrived. I mean, there are some really knowledgeable, passionate fans, but I don't know. It's just not. I guess I'm getting too old for it, Glenn.
Noisy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's manufactured noise too. It's not.
Right. I know. The last time I was at a game, it was so noisy I couldn't stand.
Yeah, you get a headache. I don't mind the playoffs because I think it's real then.
Well, you got it. Yeah.
But all this, jeez.
I can't stand the rap music.
One thing I love about football, you don't have to manufacture noise. The fans, they're into it. It's life or death.
It's true. Okay, here we go. Anything you want to cover?
No, we'll just keep whatever Glenn feels like talking about.
Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Edward Brown and Bruce McGowan here. When we get to the second commercial break, we asked this trivia question. What was the first major league team to play in Arizona, and what was the year? I'm
going to defer to our guest, Glenn Dickey, because I think he knows the answer. Glenn?
Well, the New York Giants, I think the New York Giants and Cleveland Indians came out the same year.
Okay.
The Giants were, if there was only one team, it was the Giants. They came to Phoenix. Well, actually, they settled up in Casa Grande. They had their own training complex up there, and the Indians went down to Tucson, and then maybe that was the next year. But anyway, the Giants were the first.
Actually, Glenn, you got to go back before you were born.
You're kidding me.
1909, Chicago White Sox.
Oh, is that
Are
right?
you serious? Wow. I never would have. I didn't think any teams came out until the 50s.
In fact, if I remember correctly, I think Cap Anson was one who invented spring training.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I know your favorite player.
Camp Anson was the guy that helped to push blacks back off the field because there were actually African Americans, a few of them playing, and he boycotted them.
Across the field,
yeah. Horrible story.
So,
well, go ahead.
No, good.
Well, I was just going to say, Glenn Dickey, our guest, and Glenn, we were talking about some of the, we've been bouncing back and forth between the past and the present. Some more of the moves that are being made, and Ndamukong Suh, maybe the most talented defensive lineman in football, probably going to be signing with the Dolphins. I mean, at this time of the year, we always see a lot of player movement in football, and I know that it's exciting, but it's almost like pro football. It's like fantasy football now, isn't it? I mean, the players move around so much, it's hard to keep track.
It's really something to Sue, because the Raiders were eyeing him too. Everybody was. He's really a dominant defensive lineman, but he's also such a dirty player. I wonder how long he's going to last before he gets suspended, for something. Because he just does things he doesn't have to do to be effective.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you're talking about fans who get excited about things, because fans react to players, and sometimes a player may want to spark the fans' interest. Interesting story here I just read, and I'm not sure what this means, but from what I've read here, that one of the stadiums that has been proposed for downtown Los Angeles. And I'm not sure if it's the one that they were talking about that would possibly house both the Chargers and the Raiders who could move there. Okay, this is a different one then. That one of them is supposed to be dead in the water. Is that right?
Yeah, this is the one that was proposed for downtown.
Now this is the one that would have brought the Rams back to Los Angeles.
They were. It was a private investor. He was going to build a stadium and then the team to come play there.
Right.
But that was different. The one that Carson was, the Chargers and Raiders were supposedly going together. My understanding is that the Chargers are getting a new stadium.
Is that right? Okay. But the Raiders have signed a one-year deal in Oakland, but their future, again, it always just seems to be up in the air. It's kind of sad. All the Oakland teams, the Warriors, the A's, and the Raiders are all, the Warriors are moving out to San Francisco in a couple of years. The A's are always in, getting ready to jump somewhere, although there's no place to go. And the Raiders, it's anybody's guess where they're going to be in 2016.
Well, it's just a mess. Actually, the best solution, that's a very large area out there. Now, I don't know if you've been there lately, but they've really made a huge area where they're going to put a lot of infrastructure in, put a lot of retail. They're planning a lot of things in there. There is room. I think what would work best for them would be to build a baseball park there.
Mm-hmm.
Let the Raiders continue to play in the Coliseum, which their complaint about the Coliseum now is that with the baseball season lasting 3.5 years, they have to play with this dirt infield all the time. They have so many games where they're playing on the dirt. It used to be that the baseball season would be over at the end of September, but now, it'll probably be playing into January this year.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is crazy.
To me, that would work a lot better because the Coliseum would work fine as a football stadium for the Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have all the fancy boxes, that they have in the new stadiums, but they they couldn't afford to build. Nobody can afford to build that kind of stadium.
Yeah.
They'd be better off just with their own stadium there and the A's playing in a separate baseball park. It's a good location, because the transportation, bars is right there, highways are right there. It's really it's a real hub for that, so people can get to games different places. So that would be the best solution, but whether they'll do that, I have no idea what they're going to do, frankly.
Glenn, I wanted to ask you this question. I was just looking at Sports Illustrated and I noticed there was this little tiny article here about do you remember 1990, what they said, was it 94, 95? I guess it must have been 95 in baseball because 94 had the strike. So 95, they had they called it sham spring instead of, spring training, right? It said here, former minor league outfielder Ira Smith, to the story of being a replacement player, altered one's chances of making the majors. So he played in around 10 replacement games for the Padres. However, once the strike was over, the team opted not to call up Smith from the minors despite his .400 average. So I guess it's one of those situations where, the guy crosses the picket line and suddenly he gets blackballed.
Yeah, that was a weird situation. You remember, Glenn, there were a couple of guys, I think, that actually ended up playing in the major leagues, and it took them years to gain acceptance. And I can't remember which players, but that was just
that's really a bad situation. I can understand that, certainly.
Yeah.
It did cross the picket line, and that, but that whole thing was bad. And that was Bud Selig. He couldn't negotiate.
Yeah. Yeah, that whole period of the mid-'90s was interesting because the NFL instituted the salary cap, the Major League Baseball had the strike. I mean, it was really kind of a cracking time in sports in the mid-'90s.
Yeah.
It really was.
It's kind of a shame because, if you think about it, if you're the player, what's your chances that you're actually ever going to get called up?
Yeah.
That's your one place to try to, shine, and then suddenly, even if you do shine, all the other players are going, now forget to make sure that this guy doesn't get, get the play. The same thing kind of happened in football too.
Yeah.
I had a friend who it turned out he was a field goal kicker for the Jets, and he played only during the strike portion. They called him scab and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Boom, as soon as the real players came back, didn't matter how well he was doing, they just didn't invite him back.
Well, the good news, Glenn Dickey, is that we haven't had any real problems, labor problems in pro sports now for a while, at least with the two major sports, baseball and football. That's good news for the fans.
Well, that's.
Is that only temporary though?
Much money
Yeah,
now.
it is.
They don't want to strike.
No, why would they?
Heavens.
I don't realize too much
Cost
money.
them a lot of money.
Yeah, no
Well,
question.
there's an interesting thing about '94, and nobody has ever, to my knowledge, written about this. They talk about steroids and the home run race in '97, I guess it was, and all that kind of stuff. But '94, in the first 112 games before the season abruptly ended, Matt Williams hit 43 home runs.
I remember.
He was on a pace to break Roger Maris's record, which was 61 at the time. Well, Matt had never hit more than, I think his high was 38 home runs. He was a guy that hit, 32, 34, 35, 36, that time, he was that type of home run hitter. All of a sudden, he's got 43 in 112 games. He wasn't on steroids. The ball was juiced.
That's right. Yeah, they talked about that. I remember that. Yeah.
Well, I think Ken Griffey Jr.
Nobody
too was on tear.
ever talks about that.
Yeah. Well, they did for a bit, but not enough. You're right.
Through baseball history.
Nothing.
But you know what though? I mean, think about it. It's not just him, right?
Records are so sacrosanct.
Yeah.
Well, they aren't at all.
Yeah.
They just depend when a guy was playing, where he was playing. I mean, if you're playing
in Chicago,
Wrigley Field, or there are a lot of parts. If you're playing Yankee Stadium, you're a left-handed pull hitter. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
My dad always used to say he was a big Ted Williams fan and a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And he used to say, why couldn't Ted Williams have played, here in New York and had DiMaggio play in Boston?
Yeah, better stadiums.
Oh, yeah, for both of them it would have been better,
Yeah.
Of course, Williams, he did all right.
Yeah.
DiMaggio did too. DiMaggio hit a lot of balls to left center that just died, in somebody's glove. That would have been home runs.
Now, you talk about a couple of curmudgeons. Now, Joe was a little more agreeable, but you had to kind of gain his trust. But Ted Williams just did not like reporters at all. But you got to know DiMaggio a little bit, didn't you, Glenn?
What?
Didn't you get to know Joe DiMaggio a little bit just because he was in the area? I mean,
he's an asshole.
Oh, okay. How do you really feel about him?
Joe DiMaggio only cared for people who could do something for him.
Wow.
Williams I had a long talk with Williams one time about hitting.
Mm-hmm.
He was managing, I just said hello and asked him one question, and he just rambled on for half an hour.
Kind of like Pete Rose.
He was, he just loved to talk about hitting.
Interesting. Yeah, because my experience was just the opposite. But again, I guess it all depends on your own. I had a great interview with Joe DiMaggio once. He couldn't have been nicer. But I can see it though. I'd heard stories about how he was very dismissive with people. And one thing about Glenn Dickey is Glenn was not afraid to take on somebody or a topic and be unpopular. But it actually was a good thing because I think it got people to, be provocative and talk about things that needed to be discussed. And was that something that was always a part of your approach, Glenn, or did you just come along at the right time and your style fit in there?
Well, my approach was always, number one, and I want to be honest, I never wrote anything I didn't believe.
Mm.
That's not true of all writers.
That's true, yeah.
Just, I was determined to write what I believed. And I also made a very determined effort to find people who knew more about the subject than I did. And Bill Walsh was a key in that, I just, I would ask him questions and just listen to him, and he gave me a real education.
Yeah, he really you guys had a very good relationship, didn't you?
And Tony La Russa, I learned a tremendous amount from Tony
Mm-hmm.
and from Al Rosen. You know, I asked Al a lot of questions. These are guys, Frank Robinson, you know, because I could ask, like, with Frank and Al, you know, I could ask them what it was like for them playing, you know, and what it was like facing some kind of pitcher, you know. So, you know, they could give me insights.
Mm.
And so that's what I was looking at. Billy Bean, you know, when he took over the A's, we were laughing one time because his father is a year younger than I am.
Yeah.
Wow.
But, you know, but we're, you know, despite our age difference, we got along beautifully. But he had done two things that I had never done. He had been a player and he'd been a scout. So he had information from both those jobs that I could never have had, you know. So I could mine that, you know, get that from him. So that's what I tried to do. I tried to have as much information as I could possibly have before I wrote. I wasn't just writing off the top of my head. You know, it wasn't just opinion. It was something that I knew.
Glenn, thank you so much. We're gonna say adios to you now, but I really appreciate you joining us on Sports Econ 101. You've been listening to Glenn Dickey, a famous sports journalist, and we're gonna have to have you on again sometime soon. Okay?
Very good. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Yeah, Glenn's a good guy. You know, the one thing about Glenn, as I mentioned, my dad used to send me, he clipped the columns out of the Chronicle and sent them to me when I was going to college in Denver, and it was like getting a little taste of home. Glenn was not afraid to take on authority figures or take on athletes, and he got kind of a bad rap sometimes, but he made a point, and I agree with it. That guy researched his material, and he never was without a lot of information, a lot of background information.
All right. Okay. So we're running on a little over, so we're gonna do our trivia question when we come back.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah, we're way over.
Oh, sorry. Oh, well.
The thing is, see, you don't have the clock, so you don't know.
That's true.
Yeah.
Bad. You should
That's
give me
okay.
the clock.
Well,
Oh, you used to-
yeah, but you don't. If you don't have it, you
If I
don't
don't
know
have it, yeah.
No, that was good.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to. This one I might have to tell the sports that he said because I don't know if they're going to want to bleep out the word.
Oh, the asshole. Yeah. He was an asshole. I was like, whoa, how did you really feel?
Yeah, exactly.
God.
Yeah, they got on my case about the Jim Barnett saying SHIT. You know.
Did he say shit?
He did.
Wow.
And they said, "Dude, you got to tell us that." And I go, "Oh, that's just like that." I mean, I heard it, but then I was thinking, "Oh, you know, did they
I like
send
Jim
it on a
Barnett.
swear word?"
Jim was great.
Yeah.
He was so funny. He's such a curmudgeon, though. He's like,
He-
yeah, you guys told me it was 20 minutes. We're giving it for an hour.
Well,
I had him at the theater, and he was, wonderful.
Okay.
And it was so sad. We only had like about 30 people showed up,
Oh,
and I was really bummed. I mean, it was a good little crowd. It wasn't
Sure.
embarrassingly small, but
yeah.
I just thought, God, all these people are missing this great chance to hear this guy tell these wonderful stories.
No, somehow, you know what? The thing is, maybe it's got to get advertised more.
Well, when I had John Miller, the place was packed. I had 250 people. When
Wow.
J.G. Snow showed up, I had almost 200.
I guess you get baseball.
Baseball people just draw better. Yeah, I don't know what it
Get
is.
Steph Curry and Clay Thompson then show up,
Oh,
then you'll get some
Yeah,
people.
that would be something. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
So let's close this bad
Sounds
boy out.
all right.
Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Bruce McGowan. That was a great interview with Glenn Dickey. We're going to just ask and answer the trivia question. This is a hard one anyway.
Okay.
In one game in August of 1958, the Douglas Cooper Kings, Class C in the Arizona-Mexico League, recorded a feat never before accomplished in professional baseball. And it's tough. It's kind of random.
Got it. I know there have been a few unassisted triple plays, so it couldn't have been
Think
that.
of that. This was every player in the lineup hit a home run.
Wow.
I don't have a
Are
final
you
score
kidding
here.
me? Wow.
That's
Every
a tough
player in the starting lineup, or just every player in the lineup? They said the lineup.
They
Maybe.
said the lineup. They probably meant the starting
Well,
lineup.
that's
but
still that
that's
is
home runs.
wow. That's like a little league game. You know?
Exactly.
Jeez.
The T-ball.
Wow. Yeah, T-ball. Exactly.
All right. So here's our thoughts for the day here. Now, this is something Babe Ruth said. Every strike brings me closer to a home run.
That positive way of looking at things.
Yeah. And the miracle isn't that I finished. The miracle is that I had the courage to start. And that's from John Bingham, the author of A Beginner's Guide to the Joy of Running.
Okay.
That's pretty good. I bet
I
a
like
lot of
that.
people thought that, that it's not that they finished, it's that they encouraged to start.
Yeah.
I
Well,
can imagine that, especially in running.
you take off on a 26-mile marathon, and you're, boy. I ran 16 miles once in a race, and it's a killer. I never will do that again.
Yeah.
Ever.
Again, the bad feet. That'll.
Oh, that wasn't the
That's
feet.
what I've
With me, it wasn't the feet. I was in good shape too. I was like
Yeah.
23 years old, but I just when I hit mile 10 or mile 11, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this to myself?
Well, it's like the joke with the guys, and he's having problems with his wife, and the doctor says, "Well, I know what your problem is. You're not getting enough exercise. You got to run 5 miles a day, and then give me a call back in a month." So he asks the doctor. The doctor calls him a month later and says, how are things with your wife? He goes, I don't know, I'm 150 miles away from home. All right, tune in next week to Sports Econ 101. We're going to be discussing sports topics from a business perspective and giving away more free vacations for answering sports trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm your host, Edward Brown. We'll see you next week. So long.
All right.
Okay, that's it.
That's
That's a quick wrap.
There you go.